Wednesday, May 2nd, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I want to talk about inflation, rising prices, cost of living, and also debt. I think a lot of people get it wrong because they believe that inflation is the measurements we get from governments. In the US, it's the CPI, or the Fed looks at the PCE. Here in the UK, it's also called CPI, but there's also an RPI. Those are not measures of inflation. You see a lot of times in the mainstream media and other places, oh, inflation has gone up, inflation has gone down, CPI drops. But CPI is only a measure of prices. And I think it's got a lot to do with how they control perception and how the powers that be, the central banks, the Keynesian economists or PhD economists, if you want to call them, that's how they've conditioned us to accept our currency getting debased every year for like 100 years, especially after 1971, when the United States Treasury defaulted on its pledge to pay gold to other foreign governments, to basically redeem paper dollars into gold at a rate of $35 per troy ounce. It's since then. You can look at all the charts, the national debt, the cost of living, everything has exploded. Government, the size of government has gone up as well. Statists love fiat money because they can create it out of thin air with the central banks and the commercial banks. Of course, it's the commercial banks that create the money in the end of the day through loans. Central banks don't create it directly, but they make it possible for the commercial banks or the private banks, if you want to call them that. And if you go back to the 1970s, I have a dictionary here, a Merriam-Webster dictionary. It was my dad's, and he gave it to me in the late 70s or early 80s. And the definition was still inflation is the increase in the money supply, which results in rising prices. But nowadays, you look at the definitions, they say that inflation is a rise in price. So they've completely changed the terminology so that they can put the kind of lie about what's going on. And how do they lie about it? Well, they keep tinkering with the CPI. If you haven't looked closely into that, I recommend shadowstats.com. John Williams, he shows you how, if we used the CPI protocols that they used 20, 30 years ago, that prices are rising more like 5 or 10%. So when they tell us there's low inflation, it's all a lie, and that's why the public is getting angrier and angrier, because they know that the pound or the dollar or the euro or the Swiss franc doesn't go as far as it used to 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So when people come out and say we have no inflation, they're either ignorant about what inflation is, or they're just being deceptive, in my opinion. And why am I talking about this? Well, I've just seen an article on Zero Hedge that came out this afternoon London time, morning New York time, and it says Treasury increases auction sizes to fund soaring deficit, launches two-month bill. Wow, that's a new one to me. I worked in the bond market for over 20 years as a futures broker. I did some cash treasuries as well, and I never heard of a 2-month bill. It's usually a 1-month bill and a 3-month, 6-month, 9-month, and a 12-month T-bill. And after that, you go to a 2-year note. So And what's this got to do with inflation? Well, the fact that the deficit is soaring means that the national debt is soaring. And what happens when you have a national debt soaring is that the Treasury has to issue more debt, and debt in the fiat money system is money. It's fiat money, of course. It's not real money, like a 1 ounce buffalo coin, which can't be conjured up out of thin air, like by the U.S. government. So much for making America great again. It's just ridiculous. So we are seeing increasing amount of debt, and there's people out there who are saying that there's no inflation. I'll read a little bit from the article. It says, while traditionally a snoozer, this morning's Treasury's refunding announcement was closely watched for details on how the U.S. Treasury's plans to fund its soaring budget deficit in the coming quarters. Shortly after it announced it had sold a near record $488 billion in debt in the last quarter. Specifically, bond traders were looking at how much upcoming auctions would increase by and whether the Treasury would also introduce a 2-month T-bill auction, as some strategists had expected. Well, and it goes on to say, well, the Treasury did all that and more, revealing that it would sell $31 billion in 3-year notes on May 8th, and a $5 billion increase versus $26 billion sold last quarter. Additionally, the 10-year refunding auction, or the 10-year note, on May 9th will increase by $1 billion to $25 billion last quarter. A similar increase for the 30-year auction, which would increase from $17 billion on May 10th versus $16 billion the last quarter. So you get the idea. There's an endless sea of debt coming, a tsunami of debt. The U.S. Treasury is like a drunken sailor. Yes, it's bad for the general public, but the Keynesians and the people in power, central banks and politicians, they like this, because what does it mean? It means more money in the system. And the 1%, the bankers, the politicians, Donald Trump, they've got the wherewithal to protect themselves from this inflation. But the general public, they don't. And that's why you see videos like King World News put on their website the other day of this really sad state of affairs in California, in Anaheim, a 1 mile like bicycle path or some kind of road outside Anaheim by the Anaheim Stadium. Rows and rows of like tents, homeless people living there. So I know their circumstances are all different, but America's becoming more like a third world country. And why is that? Well, because of inflation. And for people to come out and say that there's no inflation, I think it's totally, how can I say, it's not true. It's not fact. I guess the people on Wall Street, the 1%, people who are doing well and earning a lot of money, work on Wall Street or government, they get expenses paid, everything. They don't care if, the cost of a cup of coffee or milk or butter is going up. I don't think Jay Powell or Ben Bernanke or Alan Greenspan ever go shopping, or so all the PhD economists at Harvard or Princeton. They don't realize that the cost of living for the general public is going up. So that's what's going on. So don't believe it when people say there's no inflation and that we're going to get deflation. We might get deflation of asset prices, but the dollar is going to keep falling in value. It can only go that way, especially with soaring deficits. More supply of money or debt will make it worth less and less against real things. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it far and wide. The more people watch my videos, the better, especially now that I'm getting censored quite a bit by YouTube. And I actually appreciate all the people who have made donations to the channel. Yeah, so if you think my videos add value, make sure to look below in the description, all the details for donations. I would appreciate it. And you can also follow me on DTube and on Steemit and on Twitter. And I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.